Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Tonight, the 29th of November, 2024, Paul Fedeles from Port Macquarie, New South Wales, Australia, is going to share some down under flies with us. And when we get to the weekly tip, it's not a seam. Not just a seam. I'll try that again. Or did I spell that word wrong and was the E supposed to be a C and it's not just a scam? Stick around, folks. You'll find out later in tonight's presentation. Anyway, though, let me get my good friend Paul in here. Paul is from Port Macquarie, New South Wales, Australia, where he enjoys his retirement from a career in high school sports coaching and teaching. He is an ROTC graduate from Colorado State University. After college, he was commissioned in the U.S. Marine Corps as an infantry officer. He was discharged in 1972 as a captain with 2 Combat Valor Awards and a Combat Action Ribbon earned in Vietnam. In 1973, he immigrated to Australia to become a sports coach. While coaching at Barker College, a private high school, his teams racked up 376 wins, 68 of which were consecutive. He earned numerous coaching awards, including New South Wales ABC Schools Coach of the Year. He started tying flies and fly fishing in 2008 and is a member of the Sydney Fly Rodders, Hastings Fly Fishers Club, and the Coast Fly Fishing Club. Tonight, Paul will be talking about Down Under Fed's favorite flies that work.
Okay, first off, it's not fair that I have to follow Dutch Bachman, right? So you're not getting Dutch Bachman tonight. Okay. Now, in living in port, we pretty much have tied almost all the flies that we'll ever use when we either go fishing, saltwater fishing, or even trout fishing. But I just like tying flies, so I end up with boxes and boxes of flies that I probably will never use. So when I go fishing, I experiment with everything. I just had a 5-day trip to a place called Dunmore Trout Waters where they have all sorts of lakes and you can fish for trout and other fish. Well, the last trip I went there, I was there for 2 days and I caught 13 trout, 50 plus redfin, and 1 turtle on 20 different flies. Okay. This time the major dam had been decimated by cormorants, or as they call them here in Australia, shags, right? So and most of the dams were covered with leaves and rot, so we could only fish in one spot, and there was limited access to the deep water. And I was there for 5 days. I used 30 plus flies and caught fish on 6 different ones, and 2 I tied last week for Project Healing Waters, and I'm going to tie 2 for you guys today, or in your case tonight. Now, my novelty value is that I live in Australia, so I thought I better use the aspects in that in my presentation. Australia is as big as the United States. I live in New South Wales. Port Macquarie, I'm going to push the right button. Port Macquarie is in this area here. Now, this is pretty much all of maybe southeast United States. Our main fishing area is in the Bathurst area, Snowy Mountains, and around Cooma. I live in Newport Village. It's now been changed. So my wife and I came up with it. We call it the Community Leisure Resort. In reality, they've changed it now, and we're in an over 55s community, which is lend-lease, where you own your house and you rent the land. Now I got two plugs, 2 uninvited plugs, Hastings Fly Fishers. So if you want to subscribe, you can do us a favor. And I always like to put a plug in for my mentor, Dave Wilson, who has a really good fly fishing skills course, flyfishings.com. And so Down Under Fed's favorite flies at work. I gave myself that nickname. Okay. But first, a word from the Australian Tourist Bureau. We're famous down here for deadly snakes and throughout the world, the most deadly venomous snakes in the world. Those sharks, spiders, and snakes and all, they all get a bad press. We got all sorts of other good things. That's a brown snake. All right, now I was looking around and I got Australia's 30 most dangerous animals. Now, if you look down the bottom, if you look up Australian Geographic and on YouTube and then enter Australia's most dangerous animals, all the animals come up and you get a picture of each one. And below the picture of each one is another small picture. And if you click that small picture, they write a story about each one. So you get all the different a fair few snakes. That's an Australian term, right? I've seen a fair few snakes. And then I've got three major ones that I've had where I'm walking along the stream and I put my foot down and one of the brown snakes hits my foot. You know, hits a foot, climbed over the foot, and kept going on its way. I don't think it knew. Probably thought I was a rock or something. And then once in Australia, I sat down on a bank and I felt something to my right, and I looked down in the bushes and there's this little black thing there. And so I reached out to grab my rod to whack the bush to scare it away, and I moved. As soon as I moved, it shot back into the water. Then in Vietnam in 1968, I'm sitting next to a tangled bamboo forest listening to a USA football game. Actually, O.J. Simpson was playing in that one. And next to me, one of my Marines, a farm boy from Iowa, was sharpening this humongous knife he had. And I hear this thunk next to my arm. And I look over and he had just cut the head off of a green bamboo viper right next to my arm. And all he did was turn around and start resharpening his knife. And then my wife's favorite story is that she used to have to clear the funnel web spiders out of the neighbor's swimming pool before they went swimming. This is the funnel. It used to be that their bite used to be fatal, but now they have an anti-venom because the actual poison is so small that they had trouble. So people catch these alive now and give them to the scientists, and when they milk them. And then I had to put some Australia out of here. This is a song. It's like one of the Tied Me Kangaroo Down thing by Slim Newton. You can look it up and get it off the internet. It's about redback biting them on the rear end. Now, I just put this here. You don't have to read it. This is a brown snake. And that was a tiger snake. And then, all kidding aside, I'm in the 3 fishing clubs, and I don't think I've ever heard of anyone getting bitten by a snake. Forewarned, though, everybody carries an ace bandage, right? Now, I have a smart bandage, or maybe one for dumb people, because what it is it's got a rectangle, picture of a rectangle on the bandage, and when you stretch it to the right distance, it becomes a square. So you don't make it too tight, and you don't make it too loose. And everybody wears gaiters and waders on your wading staff, and you wet wade, you put a sock on, wading boots. Straying snakes, this is the thing, straying snakes have the deadliest venom in the world, but because of the lethality, they have this really small fangs. So a lot of times thick jean material will prevent penetration. And the main the difference too is first aid here, you actually wrap the whole arm with your ace bandage. So if you got bitten on the hand, you would wrap the whole arm. And I think I'm not sure, but it's transferred through lymphatic system. So the idea is a compression, maintain it. And then the most important thing is when you get to climb out of the bank, because you got all the crap on all your legs. If you climb out of the bank, you don't want to get a facial with a snake if you're climbing out. And then I was told just recently that in Australia you don't step over the log, you step on the log because there could be a snake on the other side. And then the clumsy bit about me is I walk around so clumsy now, I like pretty much scare them away. And then you wrote the thing, "Watch Out for Snake" story, which is actually a story. We're fishing the Threadbow River, and we walked one through area, and you have to go down a real steep bank. And if you lose your balance, you fall in the rocks, which would pretty much ruin your whole day. So it was a big deal getting to where we were going. We bush bashed a bit. We started to come up to a stream, and there's a road up above. And so the 2 Chinese guys, I think it was a guy and 2 guys, or guy and his wife, or whatever it is, come down. He's got a $10 Kmart spinning rod, and they're both in shorts, and I don't know whether they had thongs or Ho Chi Minh sandals or whatever. And they made so much noise that there's no way we were going to fish this area. And so I don't know if Dave's still here. Murray was the guy I was fishing with, and he goes, "Watch out for snakes." And the two of them, And they grabbed everything and ran back up the hill. And that's my fly tying philosophy. I have to put some marine stuff in there. Okay, now, first fly I'm going to tie is a Malleefowl Soft Hackle. Now, I was given, I'm going to go back to this. I was given a Malleefowl pelt. This is it here. And I was that big, I took it apart. It's laid it on the floor. And on the pelt, it was I think it was a deceased state because the plastic was really, how plastic gets old and changes color and whatever. And it had brown mountain hen on it. Now, I looked up on the internet, there's no such thing as a brown mountain hen. So I started looking through pictures and found out that this was a Malleefowl. Well, they're an endangered species, right? And so I got this big pelt. I was going to send you some, Al, but I think I'd get arrested for transport endangered species.
Yeah, let's don't do that, Paul. Let's don't do that.
Okay. Now, the Malleefowl, Mallee is actually Aboriginal term for a sandy or dusty area. And what they do is they dig a hole, the male and the female dig a hole. And I'm talking, maybe 2 meters wide and 2 meters deep. They dig this hole, the two of them. And then they fill the whole thing up with rotting vegetation. So they said that I read where if they do the hazard reduction burns, well, it pretty much chases the Malleefowls away because they need all that rotting material for their eggs. So they fill the hole up with the rotting material. Then the female lays the eggs, and then they cover it with sand, and they sit there waiting the sand. And what happens is that the male sticks his beak into the sand during puts his tongue out and gets a measurement. So if it's too warm, they take sand off, and if it's too cool, they add sand to it. Until the best part is when the chicks hatch, you know what happens? They just turn and walk away from them. They don't do anything. You're on your own, kids. So there's the materials. Malleefowl. That's just one feather. I got the whole thing is Malleefowl. And I put the tying steps up in case I screw up the tying so that someone can come back and look at it. And now the next one is a Mrs. Simpson fly. Dave Wilson showed me how to tie these, and it got a pain. It wasn't worth the effort tying the fly. And then I looked up, because everybody says, what's the history of the flies and whatever. Well, I don't know. So I looked it up in the internet. Turns out it's a South African fly, and it was named after Wallace Simpson, the American who tricked the King of England into marrying her. So they called it the Mrs. Simpson because it tricks a lot of trout and stuff. Well, I do mine, and I call it a Possum Simpson because it's easier, and I tie. So I find out possum is actually if you look at it, they're hunted in New Zealand for their fur and to control them, right? They actually have sometimes they get a bounty on them. But in Australia, you can't touch them. You can't yell at them. You can't do anything. And they're really nice. You could probably walk up to them and grab one. That's how the way they are. And but they're protected. And so I have possum that I got from some guy in Manly. I'm hoping it's roadkill. And he was trying to sell it to people in England for $40 or $50, 40 to 50 pounds. And I emailed him and he says, "Oh, I'll send you one for $15." So I got a whole possum. But when you look at the possum, you put a whole bunch of that stuff on there. You think, okay, but that's what it is. I put the thing under the hot water tap. That's the one on the left is and then I just wet it and show you the possum just shrinks down to nothing. And then there's the tying things. And then the last one is a Bloomfield Grub, which is I haven't used one in a while. We used to have the Sydney Fly Routers used to have a place up in Oberon, north of us in the Bathurst area, and we had 3 dams, and we stocked the dams, and we stocked it. And I went back a couple of months later and used this fly, and I could not catch fish with it. It was ridiculous, so I stopped. So I named it the Bloomfield Grub. Now on the picture on the right, is a picture of the fly after I caught the fish, right? You know, and it's one of the few times I failed to crush the barb because the only thing that was holding the fish on was the barb. When the guy netted when Phil netted it, the hook came out, and that was the fish. That was an 8.5 pound rainbow, you know. And then down the bottom here, that's pretty much the last picture I took of fish. Someone told me, says you're fishing and you're fighting a fish and you drag it out of the water and you hold it up to take a fish. The best way to describe what's happening to the fish is you've just run a 400-yard dash and you run across the finish line and someone grabs you and shoves your head into a bucket of water so you could catch your breath. And so that's pretty much what happens to the fish. You push them up out of the water and they can't catch their breath. So I don't take pictures anymore. In fact, I try and keep them in the net and just release them. Materials and the steps. Now I have to bring in some local knowledge here. This is just down the road from on the end of the street here. And this is some of the local people or the local habitat. Kangaroos laying on the ground. I went back there the last day and that little kangaroo had died. It was still laying on the ground, you know, and it could have been bitten by something or it could have been sick, whatever. Now this kangaroo, this is from my front porch bleaching over. Now this guy comes down here. He likes that guy's grass across the road, and he comes down there frequently. The best way to describe him is he's probably maybe 6 feet tall when he's stand upright, and someone said that he's pretty friendly. That whatever, because you can walk up close to him, and the thing is that one time it was raining. I mean, it was pouring rain, and there would have been 2 or 3 inches of water on the road. And then it started to hail. So he comes booting from the left-hand side and comes running, and he gets about where the line is on the line and loses it. Falls down, and he autoplanes clear across the road until he slammed into the grass on the other side and then took off down the road. And then, so this is a two-part thing. One, I show you all that's happening at he looks at us, whatever. I'll show you rush hour and the village. And then the second one, my wife is hollering at me not to get too close because he came back a week later and she says, watch out for the cars. And we actually have a traffic jam here at, I yelled at it a couple of times. Yeah, okay, I see you. That's about it. You can walk by them. You can walk by them and nothing really happens. Rush hour. There's my wife. Get out of the street, she's yelling. And here comes the traffic jam. Both my neighbors going into their house. That was a traffic jam. And there he is. I walked up closer. And if anybody wants this PowerPoint presentation, just email me and I'll send it to you. Any questions on anything Australian? First off, I'll show you the thing here. See, it says brown mountain hen. This is the one I'm using. Go ahead and put the recipe up now. I don't know what this is. Okay, and then we'll swatch over here. The first one is a soft hackle. And I put, going to use black thread, but I was even thinking you could even possibly use some orange or rusty thread, whatever. I'm using black thread. And I got to show off my Norvise. Okay, now I'm going to use one feather to do it. And what I do first with my feathers, when I get the feather that when I'm using soft hackle feathers, I clear all the crud off of it. And then I measure it on the against the hook. And so that's the feather I'm going to use for the soft hackle. And if I'm tying 6 flies, I usually make 8 or 9 of these because I screw them up. So all this is the all the marabou off of the feather. And as I did the last time, pinch wrap. All right, and then I take my malleefowl feather and I take about an inch or say half an inch. Tie that in by the tips. This is just your basic nymph, but it's using malleefowl instead of anything else. Now, initially I was using dubbing and I ended up, it's just as easy to use a couple of bits of peacock herl because all you really needed is something to make the soft hackle spread out. Typical stuff. Measure the fly. When I
Do you have a formula for how much of the feather you use, Paul?
sorry,
Do you have a formula for the amount of feather that you use?
I just measure the distance of the hook. You know, I want the back of the feather to be past the say around the bend of the hook. So I measure it. So when you look at it here, I measure the length of the thing.
Got it. Thank you.
So all the peacock curl's doing is just keeping it spread out. Double half hitch. I got some Sally Hansen's in a plastic jar that I got from the Chinese junk shop. And what I've done is I've taken one of those Velcro strips and folded it in half so you wind up with something that you can use. Because everyone has one, I use my pink and black hair dryer. And it drains all because when these get wet, we see that all right? Okay. Now the secret of the hair dryer is never to do it around your wastebasket. All right, now this is part of the possum. If you look at the possum, I'm only going to use the dark stuff at the top, but the bottom of the possum, it's got all the different softness. And what I do is you take all of that stuff and you save it all and put it in a thing. Then you can put it in your blender and end up with pretty good dubbing. But I don't, All right. So this one I'm going to use red woolly nylon, which is a nylon stretch overlocking thread. This is my too lazy to tie a Mrs. Simpson fly, but this was the best fly that we had on the weekend because I got tired of not catching many fish, and I caught this one, and I caught three real quick fish. And the guy I was fishing with, he goes, "What are you using?" And I said, "Oh, that's my world famous Possum Simpson." And so I gave him one, and he caught three quick fish. And once again, I tie my tail in at halfway, regardless. Okay, so I need four flies or four feathers. So it really doesn't matter what size feather you got when you're tying soft tackle. You just use what you need. Okay, now Mrs. Simpson, it's too big, had three feathers, three on each side. I only use two. And so what I do is I get all right. So those two are about in line with the back of the hook. A little bit more dubbing. Now it looks like crap as you're tying it, but when it gets in the water, it really becomes. And what's good about the woolly nylon is if you tie it loose and it fills in the spaces, so you get a nice big head. And because you want me to, I'll whip finish.
Oh, I love that fly. That one's going in my fly box. Any questions out there for Paul?
Okay. Any
Not a,
questions?
well, it's not a question, but I think since we don't have your exotic feathers, I would think you could tie that with pheasant church windows and it'd be
Yeah,
really cool.
or actually, was it the pheasant tail? Not pheasant tail, peacock, not peacock, pheasant feathers is what the original was. And the only reason I use Malleefowl is because I like Malleefowl, and I got so much of it, and it's different. But even the, like a marrow, this is nice because as you saw in the picture, when it gets wet, it's just a bit sticking out. And the trout went crazy. This is the easiest fly to tie. And and it's like my favorite fly because I caught the biggest fish I ever caught. If I'm going to put lead-free wire on something, I always do them all at once. So if I'm going to tie six flies or whatever, I do them always. And I put it in, and all I do is six turns. And this one, I leave whenever I do add weight to a fly, I don't shove the weight all the way to the tip. This one especially, I keep it in the middle, which turns the whole thing over. When I tie peacock herl, I always tie it in the front, take it back, and bring it forward. That way, if I miss any spots, I actually cover the whole thing. And that's it.
Paul, I have every expectation that will be a killer fly. In fact, I did notice in the picture of the big fish that your hook was almost straightened out, by the way.
It was the only thing that was holding it on was the barb. I was at place called Millbrook Lakes, and you go down there and they have all these lakes, and they take you around. And well, Phil Weigel was our guide for the day, and they were off somewhere else, and I hooked this fish, and I was up on a bank, so I couldn't walk down, and it was a tug of war. It wasn't runs or anything. It was just fighting, pulling tight. And Phil comes up, and he drives up because they get the other two guys. And I teased him because he gets out of the car and starts putting on his hip waders. I go, geez, Phil, I think you'd get in the water. He says, that's the premium package. He wasn't going to get in the water. So he missed it on the first try of the net, right? And then I got it back, and he put the net under it, and it no sooner got half of the fish up, and the hook came out, right? And it was the only time that I think I've ever fished without crushing the barb. It just bent the whole hook.
I just hated it when a hook gets straightened out like that. It's just such a waste of good hooks,
Yeah. Well, I always joke because I joke to myself that everybody tells I'm using a Gamakatsu C6 2758. I used Hogan hooks that I get from Canada. And all they are is 2X. And I get them because they think they were selling for $85 for 1,000 or something. $85 Canadian. So I don't have a lot of space to where I can practice casting. I can move around here and cast whatever, but I don't. And I saw something on the internet, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. When I coached basketball, I coached muscle memory shooting. And so I would work on this portion of the kids and then that. And so when my hand goes up, it goes like that. So I built the muscle memory, and then we worked on the whole thing so that whenever they did the shot, it was always the same. And I did muscle memory. And I always tell a joke to the fly frotters because I had a triple bypass. And I said, if you're having trouble with your casting, I recommend a triple bypass because it ruins all your muscle memory, and so you can restart and do it the right way, right? And so you don't have to unlearn it. And so the thing is that what I do now, muscle memory, on the bathroom, I have got a piece of masking tape at the right height. So it's right here. And I follow the masking tape, and that is muscle memory for your casting. So you don't have to cast, you just muscle memory. And so every time it's the same. And so, but the thing is, the tape is good because you're keeping your hand in line as you cast.
The weekly tip. It's not just a seam. And I did mean to say seam, as in seam of your clothes. And there it is. Now, some of you are going to recognize these tools, and some of you won't, and that's all right. I was good. If Ferguson was on tonight, I would be talking about these, but I'll do those another week. Set them aside. What I want you to be aware of is this tool right here. They're all the same thing. There's 8 of the same thing here. They're called a seam ripper, and anybody who has done any sewing of cloth and clothing and so forth will know what this is. I'm going to put this over at the tying vise. And the reason I shared all of this with you is because the link I just put up in the chat is to a hyperlink on Amazon, and you get all of this plus that one I laid over at the vise for $5.99. And I can tell you right now, having used this snippers right here, it's very good for a $15 set of scissors, let alone one that costs less than $1. So anyway, let's get over at the vise right now, because what I wanted to share with you is the part the seam ripper can do for you. And I want you to notice that you've got a very definite crotch there, not too dissimilar to the crotch that's on some whip finish tools, with a very sharp place for cutting thread. There's also some tools on the market now that also have that same kind of a Y place with a sharp bottom to the Y for cutting thread. And that's what this is for. I want you to notice also we have a long needle type thing that can be handy for stuff. Like, well, let's say I wanted to tear that wing apart. Well, I can do that. That could do that. Then I could turn right around real quick, hang on to all that, and cut that off. Well, I'm not going to do that because I plan on using that fly for the rest of the year. So what I'm going to do is just take another fly, set it in the vise. Again, it's just a fly that I'm doing some work on it for another presentation I'm going to do later in the year, and that's all this is. So anyway, you just tie this thread on the hook. I'll grab the tool, cuts it off. You notice that it's well protected here and here. And quite frankly, I've learned to like this a heck of a lot better than the Y-shaped things that they're now selling as the cutting tool. But anyhow, let me finish this off. I'll just do a quick whip finish on this imaginary fly. And I'll pull that up tight. Come on, there we go. And now it's time to cut it. And I'll just turn it a little bit, then I'll slip right in there with my tool, and it's cut. And as I say, you can do some materials with that as well. But anyway, that's the tool. If you're interested in it, for $5.99 on Amazon, the link is over in the chat. You can just click on it. It'll take you to the Amazon page. And I'll tell you right up front, that's an affiliate link, meaning that Gretchen and I make a very, very small amount of dollars from you all purchasing through our links. And just to show you that I'm not getting rich at this, the last 3-month period, I just got the notification this morning that I was paid $3.78 for 3 months of royalties for sending people to Amazon. So you can see we're getting rich on it.
Hey, Al, on
Yeah.
the seam rippers, it looks like it might be a fairly good tool to bend a feather, to fold a feather.
It's the more I play with that darn thing, David, the more that I am certain that it's got a lot more applications than what we've used it for up to this point. Oh, I see Sherry Seal signed in. Hey, Sherry, welcome. Anyway, if there's nothing more on the tool, you've got something to play with there. If you want to get it, go get it. If you may have it in your sewing basket. Evelyn, I suspect you got a sewing basket, and I'll bet you got one in that sewing basket. Anyhow, I am going to move now into the sharing section. Oh my gosh, there's something wrong with my sharing screen. Not only am I sharing, we're going to start out sharing tonight a thing called David's Strike Indicator, or you could call it Al's Bobber. But if you look real careful at that, now, back in the 50s when I started fishing, I had an old casting rod with black line on it, with some kind of a woven line, and a plastic bobber that looked like this. So that's why it's Al's Bobber, because I fished with that rig for a lot of years, even when I started fly fishing, because I tied flies before I ever got a fly rod. Anyway, I fished with a bobber, but David calls this a strike indicator. But anyway, what we're going to do now is going to move into, on sharing, we're going to do something a little different this year. I've always in the past gone straight to Evelyn, and this year we're going to stop most sharing days with a report on the Mystery Fly Project. Yes, the Mystery Fly Project. And I want to thank, I got to thank my buddy. John Carruth at Riverkeeper Flies keeps me in absolutely phenomenal pictures of stuff. I'll just leave it at that. There's a plug for John, riverkeeperflies.com. He's got a weekly blog. If you're not on the blog, you should be. Enough said on that. Now back to where we were. Last week, I think I showed you just the one picture that's kind of the bigger one on the left. Well, the one on the right is a front-facing view that John found on the internet for me. Well, not to be outdone, he found something else for me. This same guy has a fly and don't have a name on it, so I had to name it something, so I call it the Hairback Mystery. And there it is. Similar idea, just a heck of a lot more stuff on the hook. And it's an extended body, and I'm still struggling with getting the like this one back here, let alone these at this point. But we've had friends helping all along. This week I got emails from Carrie in the East Coast, and that was one of her first attempts. Carrie, thank you so much for sending us your version of the Mystery Fly. And I've talked about David Buckner a bit. David has inundated my email box this week. And here's some Buckner's mystery and his progress. And I want you to notice that I got an arrow pointing at the one in the lower right corner. Well, let's start with over on the far left side, working our way around until we get to that lower right corner one. David, that lower right corner one, you nailed it. And if that's the last one, then you're really progressing. If, on the other hand, one of those others is the last one, you've got some work to do, my friend. You've got some work.
Exactly.
So I don't know which is which. So why don't you chime in and tell us?
I have no idea.
That's my
where I was
problem.
in the process.
That's my problem. I've got some land here that just look awful. I got one that's looking really good, and I can't remember when I tied it because I just can't. Oh, it's a frustrating fly is all I can say. Getting back to
Hey,
our
Al.
regular. Any
Al,
questions on the mystery fly before we move on?
Al, this is John.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention on this guy's Instagram, he talks about when he ties that fly, he uses 2 posts of deer hair. And I haven't tried it yet, but I thought that was a great tip, that knowing that I think the first one is the short one and the last one is the long one, but that's how he achieves those the fan on each side.
I got that from you, John. I use that concept. In fact, I found the ones that I get that turn out pretty darn good for me. I actually use 4 bunches, tying each single bunch as the guy talked about, putting them on in 2 steps so I get a good spread on them for the right and the left sides of the wing.
Hey Al, could you spotlight me real quick? Another hack I had y'all trying to make these is I made an insert for my stacker, and it's the perfect size foam to fill that slot. But that allowed me to stack the deer hair in a kind of a staggered fashion before I tied it in, which was pretty cool.
Evelyn, let's see what you got. Oh, what? Now look at that, Paul. Aren't those beautiful?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Looking good, Evelyn. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you.
There's a fellow by the name of Joe Penich Flies. He's got a website. And on YouTube, I stumble onto this fly pattern called a black pearl, not pearl, but pearl. Beautiful Atlantic salmon looking fly. And unfortunately, that video was one of those things that was super sped up. You can almost can't even tell what he's putting on the hook. Well, next week, or on the 30th of this month, he agreed and he put another version of it so you can follow it. So anybody that wants to tie exotics, it's a beautiful fly. Beautiful fly. I don't have a picture of it here, unfortunately, but anyway, if you're so inclined to look at some medium difficult Atlantic flies, have a look at his website.
Thank you, Chuck. Anybody else?
I just want to let everybody know that the Techniques Fly Tying program will be on Tuesday the 3rd. Eric Austin is going to be the presenter, and it's going to be a very interesting class.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. For now, it's a wrap until next week. See you then. Take care.